Hey, really quickly before the video starts, I have a surprise announcement for you guys. I have a new song that's out right now called Control that's on Spotify, Apple Music, and pretty much every streaming service you can imagine. And I have a couple of other songs that are done, and I plan to release them in the future, so make sure you follow me on Spotify. So check out Control either after or before this video starts, and with that being said, let's start the video. When I first saw the trailer for NieR Replicant version 1.22 at the Game Awards last year, I thought to myself, what the hell is this? I'll be honest, I didn't know anything about NieR Automata's prequel. In fact, I probably thought it was a sequel at first, but after talking about it with one of my friends and doing a little digging, I realized that this was essentially a remaster or a newer version up of the first NieR game. Since I had beaten NieR Automata right before NieR Replicant released, I already had high expectations of the game. I knew very well that this game was going to have a really deep meaning and incredible lore just lurking beneath the entirety of its story. And after beating it, I can confirm I was correct. But before I actually give my thoughts and analyses about the game, I should mention that this video will obviously have spoilers about some of NieR Replicant's endings and lore. This video is essentially going to explain everything there is to know after you've fully beaten NieR Replicant, as well as all of my thoughts on the underlying themes. Like I've mentioned with my NieR Automata video, which if you haven't seen, you can click right up in the top right to view it. I highly recommend you to play this game through to its entirety or watch a playthrough of it, because the NieR games are an incredible experience like no other. Keep in mind that the entirety of both NieR Replicant version 1.22 and NieR Automata have 5 main endings, and you really can't just complete one ending and expect to get the full experience. So remember, if you do play either game and you reach ending A, that's not the end of the game. So without wasting any more time, let me tell you why NieR Replicant is absolutely genius. NieR Replicant's first couple of playthroughs start out as a pretty normal game. The protagonist, who I'll refer to as NieR, is on a quest to find and save his dying sister Yona, who has a deadly disease known as the Black Scrawl. He fights stark and phantasmic-like creatures called Shades, and he sides with a magical entity known as Grimoire Vice, as well as the other party members, Kaine and Emil. Throughout their journey, the game makes it clear that the team is absolutely merciless to the Shades, namely Kaine and NieR. Both of them wish to kill every shade that appears in their sights, no matter what, and what's worse is that the player eventually learns that the Shades really aren't as bad as we might have suspected, because in the second playthrough, the thing that made me realize this the most was the flashback to the Shade known as Khalil bonding with a robot known as P-33 in the depths of the junk heap. I mean, we can clearly see Khalil crying after his mother leaves him on his own, as she sacrifices herself and fights off the humans trying to kill them. This scene ultimately just makes the player ponder the question of, what even are the Shades? In fact, the NieR series as a whole does an incredible job at humanizing what we initially assumed as villains. In NieR Automata, this is the exact same case with the machines. Every so-called villain and every so-called hero is all influenced by the same human-like emotions, so it's impossible to fully label either as a bad guy or a good guy. But aside from all of this, at the very end of the game, the team defeats the Shadow Lord, who's pretty much the leader of the Shades, and NieR finally finds his sister. However, there's one weird part that I never mentioned, and that's the opening of the game. The opening takes place 1,412 years before the actual game. But what's weird is that both Yona and NieR are present in this scene. When I played through this game, I didn't have a second thought about this scene a single time until I completed the second playthrough of the game. In ending B, we see the Shadow Lord crying, and Yona from 1,000 years ago approaches him, but then we see the NieR of 1,412 years ago, lying in the same position that the Shadow Lord was. And it was at this exact moment that I realized this game is amazing. Now, let's rewind to 1,462 years ago. After the events of one of the endings of Drakengard 3, which, if you don't know, NieR is actually a spin-off of the Drakengard series, an extra-dimensional being known as the Queen Beast entered Tokyo in 2003. The Queen Beast dissolved and released particles into the air known as Maso, the demonic element. And this Maso caused a disease known as white chlorination syndrome. Once someone was affected by white chlorination syndrome, they were given 2 options. Either give up your free will and serve a god that wishes to destroy the world, or be vanquished and turned to salt. This is actually why it appears to be snowing in the opening of NieR Replicant, even though it states that it takes place in summer. It's not actually snow that you see on screen, but rather the salt from all the people who died from white chlorination syndrome. Scientists started to experiment on Mosso particles, and they eventually found a way to separate someone's body from their soul. As a result of this, humanity figured that the only possible solution to this pandemic, threatening the existence of all of humanity, was to separate everyone's soul from their body and wait for the white chlorination syndrome to die out naturally. Once the disease was gone, everyone's souls were to be transferred back into identical man-made bodies known as replicants, and this operation became known as Project Gestalt. But like most things, Project Gestalt wasn't an immediate success, and it had one major flaw that would continuously occur for every single test subject. After the separation, the soul, otherwise known as the Gestalt, would relapse. This caused the Gestalt to lose its own consciousness and sentience, and sooner or later, it would turn into a hostile, mindless creature, and you might know them by a different name, because we call them Shades. As a crucial part of making Project Gestalt work, 13 Gestalts were placed into grimoires, 2 of which are very familiar to the player, Grimoire Noir and Grimoire Vice. These 2 sentient grimoires were bestowed with magical abilities like no other, and by touching Grimoire Noir, one could separate their body and soul. This turned out to possess the most likely chance of not relapsing once the separation was complete, and because of this, duplicates of Grimoire Noir were mass-produced. And with the combined power of Grimoire Vice and Grimoire Noir, they could return every Gestalt back into the replicant bodies, and this was the key to bringing Project Gestalt to a close. In order to oversee this entire operation, android lifeforms were developed, 2 of which being Popola and Devila. Eventually, and out of pure luck, one human ended up being the first stable Gestalt, one who had not relapsed, and that human is the very same as the one you play in the opening of the game. Originally, NieR was hesitant to touch Grimoire Noir. He had known that every other human had relapsed and succumbed to their demise, yet he took the risk to gain the magical powers of Grimoire Noir in order to protect his sister. NieR fights off some shades with his newfound power, and he returns to his sister, where he finds out that she also touched Grimoire Noir. This causes her to react exactly the same as all the other Gestalts, and in her case, she immediately relapses and is inflicted with the Black Scroll. Desperate to save her, NieR is contacted by the Hamelin Organization, which is the organization that oversees Project Gestalt and the World Purification Organization. They offer to cryogenically preserve Yona's body for 1,000 years, but in return, NieR's Gestalt must provide his stable Mosso to the other Gestalts, so that they can retain their sentience. NieR accepts this offer, and now that every Gestalt relies on him for their stability, NieR's very soul becomes the Shadow Lord.
Don't touch that book. Not ever. Got it?
With 1,000 years now passed, replicants have somehow attained their own sentience and their own personalities. This is why the replicant of NieR and all the other characters throughout the game seem so lifelike. And yes, all the characters in the game are just replicants. Once I realized all of this game had become one of the best games I'd played of all time. Because everything you once believed and all the good that you initially thought you were doing ended up killing off humanity. In fact, none of the protagonists can be seen as heroes in the grand scheme of things. When you think about it, Replicant NieR is on a mission to kill Gestalt NieR, his own soul, yet he doesn't realize it. And this is exactly what Popola and Devila are trying to prevent, since they were created in order to aid Project Gestalt and bring it to completion. Once Replicant NieR kills Gestalt NieR, this ultimately causes Project Gestalt to fail, since every stable Gestalt after him relies on his stable Mosso. So once Gestalt NieR meets his demise, all of the other Gestalts relapse, and the remaining replicants will all inevitably die to the Black Scroll caused by their unstable Gestalt counterpart. And don't forget about what I said earlier about how the main party slays Shades without mercy constantly whenever they can. They're unknowingly killing off the souls of the very people they're trying to protect. Even more so, Grimoire Vice was originally created to assist Project Gestalt in returning all Gestalts to their replicants, but once he's reunited with Grimoire Noir, he refuses to uphold his original purpose, simply because he lost his memory once joining Replicant NieR's side. Grimoire Vice and Grimoire Noir could have easily saved mankind at an instant, but Grimoire Vice foolishly rejects such a notion, all because of the influence of not only a mere sentient shell, but his blindness to his true purpose. So I ask this, are the protagonists of NieR Replicant really the good guys? Gestalt NieR, on the other hand, has had a goal for the last millennium to reunite not only his sister's soul with a physical body, but also his own. Although he does eventually reunite Gestalt Yona with the Replicant at the end of the game, the same cannot be said for him. Despite her being reunited with her replicant body in what would seem to be a great achievement, it's rather a burden, because Gestalt Yona doesn't feel as if it's right, and she has no desire to have Replicant Yona's body, because she's basically just intruding Replicant Yona's life. She senses that her replicant wants to see her own brother, and Gestalt Yona relates to those feelings immensely, and ultimately decides to allow her. And because of this, Gestalt Yona decides to step into the light, and she erases herself in order to let her replicant be with her brother, and for her to live her own life. And after everything that Gestalt NieR had worked for, his one and only sister sacrifices herself. And it all just makes me think, what was really the right thing to do in all of this? Was it right for the replicants to fight against the souls of their true identities, to live their own life in their own concept of peace? Or would it have been more beneficial for the Gestalts to merge back into the replicants forcefully, denying their newly sentient bodies the free will of life, in favor of a higher plan for the ultimate prosperity of mankind? Well, maybe the answer lies in the final ending of the game. NieR Replicant version 1.22 adds one additional ending to the game that wasn't present in the original, and oh boy, does it include a lot. The new ending E takes place 3 years after ending D, where NieR erases himself and all memory of his existence in order to restore Kaine to her mortal form. I'll get one thing straight and out of the way first. Ending E is probably the closest we'll get to a definitively happy ending in the NieR franchise, which is funny because Yoko Taro actually started off creating the NieR games as an attempt to make it a little bit lighter and not as dark as Drakengard, which is saying a lot considering the amount of deep concepts we've been discussing for the past while. But I mean, the entirety of this one final playthrough features probably the most positive emotions in the game, which at first might not seem like the case at all. But what makes this playthrough different from, say, the first few hours of the game is that there's genuine hope, and the player is given a sense of somewhat certainty that maybe, just maybe, the memory and existence of NieR can be revived. In the beginning of the game, sure, all the characters try to stay as hopeful and joyous as they can, but there's a big chunk of uncertainty as to whether or not Yona will survive. People who have already touched a NieR game go into this game fully aware of a lurking catastrophe in a dying world, no matter how content the individual people of that world might be. But ending E is just so extremely different, especially within the context, because you're at a point in the game where you, or rather Kaine, have nothing to lose. Even the music alone gives such a sense of confidence, as well as the support that Kaine and Emil give to each other. And eventually, near the very end of these final moments, the Divine Tree uses the existing data of young NieR from when he first entered the tree and recreates a replicant of NieR. And despite all that's corrupt with the world and the inevitable fate of humanity, Kaine, Emil, and the player feel touched and accomplished. It doesn't matter how meaningless their journey might have been. It doesn't matter how much of a mistake their past may have been. Despite everything, the world houses the very people that we cherish and the memories that we made. Because past the weight of all wrongdoing lies the beauty of the world.